Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered, the podcast that takes the mystery out of commercial real estate and makes it accessible for everyone. I'm Caleb David, a broker, investor, and community builder with over a decade of experience helping businesses and individuals bring their visions to life. Here we break down the market, share expert insights, and talk about the opportunities that commercial real estate creates for businesses and communities alike. No fluff, no gatekeeping, just real, unfiltered conversations that empower you to navigate the space with confidence. So whether you're an investor, a business owner, or simply curious about commercial real estate, welcome. Let's dive in. Welcome, everyone. This is Caleb with Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I'm here today with another special guest that I think is really going to bring a lot of insight and expertise into the world of commercial real estate when it comes to your local building departments and questions to ask. And so I want to welcome Greg here to the show from the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department. Greg, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here and happy to share any information that we might have for people.
Awesome. Well, first, Greg, I'd like to give people a little bit of a background and history about yourself. Would love to hear a little bit about how long you've been working for the Regional Building Department and, how you got there and maybe what you did before.
Yeah, I've been with Regional for a little over 6 years now. It's kind of flown by a little bit, but yeah, my background's actually not in construction at all. I'm one of the few people at our office that doesn't have that construction background. I'm a former journalist. I was in TV news for about 12 years, moved all over the country, decided to kind of get out of that business. So then I kind of went from running the camera to being interviewed on the camera as a public information officer. So I went to El Paso County's public information office for about a year and a half, and then I got brought over here to regional buildings. So they brought me in to kind of handle the media, help teach a couple classes. I launched all of our social media pages, and then because I have that journalism background, I still write and shoot and edit and put together some educational videos that are available on our website.
That's amazing. And I think many people don't realize how many resources are available that are free or easy to access. One of them being the Permit Partner. If you guys are in the Colorado area, especially El Paso County, you can go to Permit Partner. And that is a project that Greg and I both had a chance to work on together as we were trying to make Colorado Springs one of the most business-friendly cities in the country, if not the most business-friendly. And we've worked on roadmaps for different types of businesses. Greg, what are some of the things within Permit Partner and Regional Building Department that you think that, a small to medium-sized business should some questions they should be asking before they pull the trigger and sign a lease or purchase a building?
Yeah, there's a lot, and the cool thing about Permit Partner, it's really just trying to give you an estimate to some of the things that you might run into and some of the roadmaps that we put together. A lot of that, I think, the benefits to checking out those roadmaps are the timeline. Sometimes people, they want to start a small business and they've got a great idea and they think, well, I'm going to put this together in, well, a month and I'm going to be up and running. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. Very rarely can you put a new small business together into a brick and mortar that quickly. So I think the Permit Partner mixed with the roadmaps that we have kind of put together really going to give you an idea of maybe some of the costs, some of the permits that you're going to need to get, some of the licenses that you might have to have for said businesses, but then also the timeline. How long is this going to take? When do you need to start talking to certain agencies versus, okay, I need to talk to regional building at this point, and then on down the line, now I need to start talking to this different agency and all that side of things. So I think cost and then of course, the timeline are really the things that people need to be thinking about early. And Permit Partner is of course just a great tool to kind of help with that.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of people, they just think I'm going to grab a contractor, I'm going to go into a space and we're going to start fixing it up and we're going to do so and so, but many times a lot of small businesses don't realize that, hey, if you're wanting to open a restaurant, there are requirements that the building department has. So what would some of those requirements be for, say, someone who's looking to open up a little cafe or a restaurant?
Yeah, it's really important to know the occupancy classification of the space. It can get a little bit confusing. You know, you think zoning, and we don't really deal with zoning. That's a completely separate entity from us. But just because the particular space that you have found is the right zone or it's in the right zone for your particular business, each property within that neighborhood or in that zone has its own occupancy classification. And it could be different from one business versus next door, the property next door could be an entirely different occupancy classification. So it's really, really important for commercial brokers as well as entrepreneurs to know that occupancy classification ahead of time. Because if you move into a space that's maybe not the right occupancy classification for your particular business, it could lead to a lot more hoops that you have to jump through. It could be
Yes.
more costly. It could add a significant amount of timeline to your build, to the construction project. You could have to hire a different contractor, maybe that you weren't planning on. Maybe you had a buddy, but because you're having to go through an occupancy classification, now you have to hire a contractor that has an A license, and your buddy might not have that A license. So it's so important to check that early because if you don't, I mean, we've unfortunately seen too many times tears in our office because people just did not know. And they come in, they're trying to do something, and we have to be the bearer of bad news and tell them that the property is probably not right for them and they got a lot more work on their
Yeah.
hands.
Well, I think it's important that in your role and my role, we offer this information. That's why we're doing this podcast is to inform people to ask the right questions. I very often tell clients, ask the question, even if you think it's a stupid one,
Yep.
because more than likely it's not. Lots of times there's a question under the question. And so for, let's say, what would some of the requirements be? Say, you've got a church or a nonprofit looking to open some sort of center where there is going to be gathering. It's an older building, maybe it doesn't have sprinklers. Maybe talk a little bit about that and maybe even restroom requirements.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the type of occupancy and the change of occupancy that you might be going to. If you're going from, say, an office, that would be a pretty basic build, but you want to turn that office into a restaurant or maybe some sort of large gathering like a church or something like that. That office might not have the same requirements for restrooms, emergency exits, and things. Because so since you're changing to a restaurant, more of a restaurant style, different occupancy type. Maybe now you suddenly have to have a larger bathroom or larger number of stalls in that bathroom. Maybe you have to have a number of different exits that the office didn't have. So you have to plan that into your build if you're going to be moving that into your space. And again, it's timeline because now you have to do more construction than maybe you were planning for. The cost is going to shoot way up. If you move into a space that requires sprinklers, talking with our friends just upstairs from my office with CSFD, if you have to install sprinklers into a particular space, you're looking at probably a minimum of 50 grand up to 100 grand. And for some small businesses, that could put you out of business before you even get started. So that would just be a nightmare scenario, but it's one that could definitely happen.
Yeah, so Greg, I know you work with a lot of commercial brokers and provide a lot of education from the regional building department to our community. What do you think are some of the key qualities that someone should be looking for when they are looking to hire a broker?
Knowledge. I mean, really just knowledge of not only the area, but kind of how the regional building code works, the occupancy classification, some of these things that we're talking about. It's nice to have a broker that already has that base knowledge because we kind of teach classes specifically for commercial brokers. And the idea is we educate commercial brokers, and then you guys take that knowledge that we're kind of sharing, and then you're better equipped to kind of help your customers, and then you spread that knowledge out to those potential small business owners. The class that we've offered really has expanded from just commercial brokers, but now some small business owners are starting to take it as well. They're arming themselves, which is great. The more info that we can get out on some of these kind of complicated issues, I really think the better off it is.
Absolutely. I think that communication is super key in all of this because these conversations should be had before you go try to get a loan, before you sign a lease or close, because all of those different factors that you're talking about, occupancy uses, zoning, and build out contractors licensing and that sort of thing, can definitely affect the dynamic of a deal. And
Absolutely.
so it's definitely something that we encourage folks to ask the questions and reach out.
Well, and that's one other thing that I was going to ask. You want to find a broker that's willing to ask those questions and not just try to sell you something.
Yeah.
They need to be willing to bat for you, and it could just be something as easy as calling. That's one of the things we always say. You want to do research to make sure you know what that occupancy classification is. So you want to find a broker that's willing to just simply make the call to our office to check. You can also check on our website. Do they have a subscription on the website and they know how to use our website as a great tool? Both. But yeah, use our website and be willing to call us because we're more than happy to help.
And what are some of the key things, Greg, in regards to some of the resources and information you have on the regional building website that would be important, maybe some first steps, and first items for people to be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I mean, we certainly have our activity charts. If you're just kind of wanting to find numbers, the number of commercial properties that are being permitted and getting built in our area, we have a public GIS mapping tool. That's a great way kind of to visualize where a lot of the new development is happening. And then, of course, the subscription. The subscription on our website is really key because that allows you to open up plans for a particular property, and that's what you need to check that occupancy classification. It's really going to be towards the beginning where you're not going to have to sift through and find page 84 and find that occupancy classification. It's going to be on the first one or two pages, but having that subscription is really a good way to figure things out. But there's just a lot of tools on our website. Sometimes our website can be a little bit overwhelming because it does have so much information, but it's a good thing, right? I mean, you want to have more information than not enough. And again, you can always give us a call if you run into any trouble.
Yeah, so what would you say to an investor that maybe is looking to purchase a commercial building as an investment, and maybe that building has not, you know, been brought up to code? I think a lot of people, don't understand, there are some spaces that can be grandfathered in based on the uses before, but what are some tips you would give to an investor who might be trying to acquire a property that maybe wasn't kept up to where it needed to be?
Yeah, I think you got to know, kind of have an idea of what you want that space to be used for. If you're looking to continue with the occupancy classification that it already is, that could be a lot easier, and it could just be, say, an interior remodel, which would be relatively easy. But if you already have in the back of your mind that you're wanting to change a space to something entirely different, a different occupancy classification, you need to know what that entails, and that could end up again adding to the timeline. Maybe you can't get that space ready as quickly as you would like to start renting it out. So you need to be thinking about timeline, and then of course the funding. You need to know, like, if you do have to bring it up to today's code, that can be often difficult when you're talking about some of these older spaces. So if you're dealing with a building that was built in the early 80s, bringing it up to today's code, it could be some pretty substantial changes,
Yeah.
some pretty substantial construction that you just need to kind of know what that's going to entail.
Yeah. And Greg, what does it look like? Just very high level. I know you're not in the day-to-day of, applications coming in and plans coming in, but can you give our listeners an idea of what that process typically looks like, from a high level, from, what is required from an architect, from a contractor, et cetera. What does that process typically look like, and what are some basic timeframes?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. If you're talking a new build versus a renovation, a new build, there's going to be a little bit more requirements because then you got to deal with the soil and you've got zoning and everything has to be involved. But for the most part, when it comes to commercial, and again, every project's going to be different, everything. So everything I'll be giving you will be estimates. But on commercial projects, you're looking at probably 3 to 5 weeks on plan review. So depending on how good your architect is and how quickly that gets through plan review, 3 to 5 weeks. Then once those get approved, you can immediately pull that permit. That permit then will allow you to start construction. And then, of course, the construction will depend on your builder. Some builders build quicker than others. It goes back and forth. Obviously, you only want to have 1 or 2 inspections. You don't want to be going back and forth, getting rejected and having to fix things, getting rejected and having to fix things. So it's all different. I mean, it really depends, obviously, on the complexity and the project. The main, I'd say, I wouldn't say hold up, but the time frame is going to be on the plan review side of things. And then on the inspection side of things is up to the builders. When it comes to inspections from our office, we're one of the only building departments in the state that offers same day inspections. So if your builder's working really, really quickly, they call in the inspection and we'll be there either today, either that day or the next day.
Yeah. And what are your inspectors typically looking for when they're coming out there to take a look at a project?
Yeah, it depends what trade we're coming out for. Sometimes people are often confused. They think it's one inspector comes out and looks at everything. I always say you don't want your plumber doing your electrical work. The
Yeah.
same is with our inspectors. You don't want one of our electrical inspectors doing your plumbing inspection. So it depends where you're at in the phase. So you would say you would request a framing inspection. So our building team would come out and look. They would make sure that everything's being built properly. Same with the electrical. When your electrical contractor's ready, they'll call in that inspection and we'll send one of our electrical inspectors out. So it depends kind of what inspection, where you're at in the phase of the construction, whatever inspections come our way, we'll be out. It's not uncommon for us depending to have maybe 2 or 3 inspectors there at the same time or in the same day. They'll cross paths because again, the inspection requests come in at different times.
Yeah. And so, Greg, how do materials that are being used within a site or a build out project, you know, can someone just use, a contractor just use whatever type of materials they want, or are there is that something else that needs to be looked into as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of it that's going to can depend on the complexity of the project. Are we talking a 1 story type of build? Is it going to be a 2 story type of build? And all those materials are going to be included in the plan review process. So that's all going to be spelled out early. And the reason for that is you don't want to build something out of a material that isn't allowed, and then all of a sudden you're half built, and then our inspectors come in and say you can't have all this.
Right.
So hopefully that type of thing will be caught at the plan review level, because otherwise it's a super costly and just a bit of a nightmare.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that clarification. So let's talk some numbers. I know you look at, applications and things that are going on. So maybe talk a little bit about the 2024 permit numbers and kind of what you're seeing so far in 2025.
Yeah, I think 2024, we saw on the single family side of things, at least, we did see at least a little bit of a bump in numbers. We were up by about 7% on single family home numbers, and we had seen 2 years decline on the single family side of things. So a little bit of an encouragement on the single family side of things. On commercial, it was a little bit of a slow year in 2024. It was actually the third year in a row we saw a decline in commercial construction, and that's new commercial construction in particular. The biggest area that we saw a decline was on the multifamily side of things. So 2 years ago, we had record-breaking numbers. We permitted almost 5,000 apartments in 1 year. And then in 2023, that number dropped pretty significantly, and then it dropped even further in 2024. So, certainly a little bit of a hit on the commercial side of things over the past couple years. So far this year in 2025, a little bit of a mixed bag. We started off solid on the single family side of things in January. February was a slow month, and then we saw a little bit of an increase again in March. But now looking at April, April's looking great. We're going to see one of the best months that we've had in several months. We're kind of tracking things today since it's the last day of April, trying to see where we're going to shake out. But it's going to be a good month for single family. Also going to be a good month on the commercial side of things. We've had a number of large projects permitted this month, including a couple of apartment complexes. So it should shake out to be a pretty good month of April, and we'll see kind of how things go for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and in your experience in seeing the drop of permits in the last couple of years, from your perspective, what do you think some of the driving factors have been?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and we try not to get too much into it. We don't have a crystal ball, and a lot of it's just kind of talking with the builders and what they're seeing and everything. I think a lot of it is particularly on the single, or I'm sorry, on the multifamily side of things. Things are just drastically different on the banking, so on the money side of things during COVID. I think a lot of these companies were just easier to get money and financing 3 to 4 years ago. And that's when we saw this huge increase in the number of multifamily projects. And then when the interest rates went up, it just became more difficult for them to get financing. So we saw kind of a big decline. In those numbers. And you also have a lot of those projects coming online.
Mhm.
They were permitted, back in 21, 2022. And now those projects, particularly the downtown projects, are coming online. Like we had almost 3,800 apartment units come online in 2024. In 2023, we were just over 3,000. So this year in 2025, we're expecting those numbers to be probably somewhere around 3,000. So that's a lot of units coming online at the same time. So I think the developers, they kind of they know that. So they're kind of watching those numbers and they have to think about, okay, what's the timeline if we permit another project? Is it going to be coming online at the same time? So I think there's a lot of factors. There's not really one silver bullet of why numbers are starting to go down. It's really a lot of different things.
Yeah, and I think definitely the interest rates played into that a lot. That's been my experience as far as my clients go. There has been a bit of a pause, and obviously, anytime you're in an election year, there is
Yep.
always that uncertainty of what's going to happen. So those are some of the things that we found. Greg, so on the going back to kind of property and spaces, you'd kind of alluded to this earlier about the different types of classes of licenses for contractors, but who can do work? Within a space. And what are some things that someone can do that maybe doesn't require a permit that they're able to do themselves and what's not? Because I think that's something that a lot of people think, I'm just going to go in and I've got this buddy, that's a handyman. I want to do this work. So if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, you think small businesses, not a lot of small business owners just have a ton of money just laying around. So they're trying to do things on a budget and they're trying to save money. So if they've got buddies or they can do it themselves, but it really is important to know the rules. So basically, the rules are this: if you're a tenant or if you're an owner, doesn't really matter. When it's a commercial project, you have to hire a contractor no matter what. And that's for, of course, permittable work. So if you're doing framing, if you're doing electrical work, plumbing work, if you're putting in a grease trap for a restaurant or anything like that, that's all permittable work. But there is some work that can be done by anybody, and we would call it kind of cosmetic work. So think painting, putting in new countertops or cabinets or different things like that, flooring. Those are all things that we consider cosmetic. So the tenant or the owner of a property could do that on their own. But again, once you start getting into that permittable work, you're going to need to hire a contractor to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm really excited for this episode to come out because I think it's going to be super helpful. Are there any other things that you'd like to touch on before we start to wrap up? Just kind of what people should be aware of and what
Yeah,
tricks of the trade.
yeah, one thing I would say, just never assume. In an ideal world, everybody would do things correctly and pull the proper permits and do that just the way that it should be. Unfortunately, that's not how things work. So we've seen some instances where, let's just take a coffee shop, for instance. They're like, well, I'm moving into this coffee shop that came available because before it was a coffee shop. So surely it was occupancy classification set up for a coffee shop. And then turns out they go to pull permits and we find out that before it was a coffee shop before, it was actually an office space or
Mhm.
something, something else before. So now you have to, and they might say, well, it was a coffee shop before, but it's like, based on our records, that's not the case. So even if you know it was a coffee shop, still do your due diligence to research it, have your broker research it to make sure that it actually is the occupancy classification that is for it, whether it be an office, a retail store, coffee shop, whatever. Again, always better to do the research, give us a call, and we're happy to double check and say, yep. the occupancy classification is just what you want it to be. The other thing that I'll say is we do offer classes. It's not one that we offer every month, but we have a commercial property class. I'd say the next one, I don't have it booked just yet, but we'll probably have it in late summer. In that class, we kind of go over a lot of what we're talking about here today. We're going to talk about occupancy classifications. We're going to talk about change of occupancy, what that means, the timelines, the cost of certain things, who can do work inside a commercial space, some of the licenses and different things like that. So we'll probably get that offered late summer. You can just come to our website, pprbd.org, and go to our education button and kind of keep an eye on that. It's a great class. We've seen, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, some commercial brokers, but then also a lot of entrepreneurs coming in looking to do research on their own behalf.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Greg. We'll make sure that all of the regional building departments information is in the show notes. And those of you who are out there, go out there and follow them on Instagram, follow them on, all the different sites that you can. Get the subscription, because I think it's valuable information, especially if you're looking to open up a new business or expand a current business. So that way you have the resources available. And as always, I'm available. Greg is available. There are resources. You don't have to do this alone. We are here to help you and walk you through it. So thanks again, Greg, for your time today and for all the wisdom that you brought to us. And we look forward to an ongoing relationship.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having us, Caleb.
That's a wrap on this episode of Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I hope you found value in today's conversation and feel more confident about navigating the world of commercial real estate. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could benefit from these insights. You can connect with me, Caleb David, and the team at David Commercial Real Estate. Just check the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and remember, creating space is more than just real estate. It's about building community. See you next time.